podcast listeners, if you hear my voice right now, I need you to do something for me. I want you to take out your phone or on your computer, go to Apple Podcasts, search for Ask Your Oldhead podcast. You'll see my logo, my little picture, my little image there. Find the show. Please rate and write a review. It's a small thing, but it helps others find this work and find what I'm doing here. And it really, really matters, as small as that may seem. So if you could please do that before we get into the show, I very much appreciate it. Thank you for listening. Let's get into it. Peace. Peace. You are listening to Good Brothers. Add on. Peace. This is the Good Brothers. I'm here with our Majestic as usual. Also joining us for the first time in this context, Alyasha. And we are going to endeavor or break out into a conversation about rock and roll, R&B, in light of the recent passing of Little Richard. I felt that it was sort of almost off the radar for a lot of people of him and also his era. And I didn't think that was cool. So I wanted to try to have a conversation sort of to shed some light, some energy on that world and hopefully connect some threads of how, even if some of us may not remember or don't feel connected to that, some of that energy reverberates through. So I invited Alyasha to join us here because among his many talents, the God is he's a, can I say an aficionado? Is that the right word?
Sure.
You know what I'm saying?
A learned fan.
Word up. Learned fan of the rock and roll R&B arts. So I'll lead it off and just say, Alyasha, could you give us, maybe just some context, like sort of the around rock and roll, R&B? I mean, don't have to be Little Richard specific, but just within the vein. Like, where does that sit? Why is it important when we're talking about Black expression and creativity?
For me, largely because it's Black music. I remember being a kid and Black folks being like, "Why are you listening to white boy music?" And then my mom would be like, my old earth would be like, "It's not white boy music. Like, that's Black folks music." Like, the term was invented by Black folks. And you can hear the term rock and roll going back to like old blues records. Cab Calloway mentions rock and roll in the 30s on some of his records, and it's, there's documentation of it being used, or the term being used at the, little after the turn of the century. And so rock and roll is intercourse. And so we've been using this term. It's been part of Black culture for so long. And interestingly, rock and roll music was called rhythm and blues for a long time, R&B. And it's also fascinating to me that in our contemporary space or the contemporary context, if you said R&B to someone in the 90s, they'd be like, "Oh, it's Jodeci and, Mary J. Blige." And, and then if you said it to somebody in the, let's say the 70s, they might be like, "Oh, it's Teddy Pendergrass or SOS Band," or, but prior to the 70s, R&B, people would think Bo Diddley, Chuck Berry, Little Richard. It was rock and roll. The terms were synonymous for the most part. And it really wasn't until the concept of soul music and or funk, which were newer genres in the space of R&B. So now we associate what many people would consider soul as R&B, even though we don't really use the term soul music anymore, which is really frustrating to me and actually saddens me. because it's such a strong term, right? Soul.
Right.
Like, to call music soul music, that's like heavy. Anyway, so I know I kind of went off on a tangent. I try to bring it back.
That's all right. We in the right.
Sorry, go
ahead. So I listened to this last week, or what we at our previous discussion to set up this. Listened to some of your mixes, right? And of music, and it got me thinking about a whole lot of different things. But I wanted to pull you in, Majestic.
Yes, sir.
We're gonna come back to the mixes, but when you think of rock and roll or R&B, what's sort of the image that comes in your mind around this week?
I mean, I think it's, Alyasha brings up a really, really good point, which is like self-definition and then definition externally, and then the shifting of those, right? Because I think as the guy pointed out, you go from everything from like, here's the blues and here's rhythm and blues, and to his point, rhythm and blues was a faster rhythm. Right? It was a different, you know what I mean? It wasn't just like, because the blues could operate in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
And so, because you had a lot of variations of blues based on where you was from, right?
Yep.
You got the Memphis blues, you got New Orleans blues, right? You got Chicago blues. And so what I always find interesting, that you see different types of the same music in different parts of the country, influenced by where they were and who influenced them, right? Which becomes something you see later in hip hop. But then you go and you have this rhythm and blues, and then, like you said, soul music, which then becomes this really broad interpretation, right? Like a lot of stuff could sit underneath that. But then it seemed like when as a music industry needed to frame things appropriately, they took what was rhythm and blues, shifted it to rock and roll, got black folks out of thinking that they was doing rock and roll, or rock and roll was their thing, moved on to jazz, moved on to certain kinds of jazz, soul jazz, which is a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Then moved you and put your hands up in the V. Remember we was talking just about
about Bill Withers.
Bill Withers. He said, man, I don't do the kind of music, man, put my hands up in the V, tell her I love her. You know what I mean? Like, and so, but it goes into the packaging of the music, right? So, I was fortunate to have people in my family who still knew, and I had my Uncle Jimmy who listened to the blues and listened to rock and roll, and would not and will not give up that is our music. But I think it's also the relationship that many people have to the South, that many people have to their forefathers and foremothers. And then also the final thing I'll say, just is like, it's about what we pass down. What do we think is important to share? Right? Like, so sometimes we'll pass down stuff around our families, but we're not pass down the music and the records, right? And I think passing down records and music becomes a very important thing. And one thing I'll put a pin in, but Alyasha, I would like your perspective, is the role of Jimi Hendrix in this conversation from your perspective. Because also often I try to, it seems like one of those like crossing the Rubicon moments of like, the last time you see somebody, quote unquote, black doing this, it's veers over here, and then everybody got their hands up in a V. So,
right. Wow. I mean, Jimmy, Jimmy worked with so many people that he was a student of Buddy Guy. And that relationship is very popularly known. He worked with Little Richard. He played with Little Richard. He toured with Little Richard. And he toured with the Isleys. I mean, the Isleys are a great example. Sorry, I'll bring it back to Jimmy. But the Isleys are an example of like that space. People don't know Shout was their record.
Right.
That's the Isleys. That's a rock and roll record. And now, that's also the Isleys, like, 60s, 70s Isleys is that, I don't even know how many samples came out of those records into like Mr. Big. But Jimmy, is important for the space, or is referenced because he moved into a space that for the record industry, let's say, was, you have this like there's psychedelic rock, and then, which is also interesting. And this is to the same conversation. And I obviously we know, and I know that I go off on tangents, and I will try to bring the point home. So if you listen to early Rolling Stones records, I mean, the Rolling Stones are named after a Muddy Waters song. They were playing blues. All of their original hits are blues songs. Little Red Rooster, Dust My Broom. Those are all like Howlin' Wolf songs, which are largely, I don't want to say Negro spirituals, but they come from a deeper place, right?
Yeah.
And then the thing and then, you look at Led Zeppelin's another great example. All their original hits are blues songs. Like When the Levee Breaks is a blues song. A lot of their stuff is blues. And they would try to tell you like, yo, we're trying to be a blues band. But it became this rock and roll space, and then it moved into the psychedelic space. And what was special about Jimmy and what blew doors for so many of these people, the other rock and roll, contemporary rock and roll or white artists, not that he needed that validation, but they were like, oh shit, he's the real deal. He's what we want to be. And he's one of the baddest guitar players to grace the face of the planet. He plays upside down and backwards, literally, because he just was like, I want to play guitar and I don't know how to do it, so I'm going to figure it out. And he just did it his own way. And then people are like, holy shit, this motherfucker's amazing. And he tours with Buddy Guy or studied with Buddy Guy, and the amount of people that he had worked with is bananas. You find like tons of old photos with him and like, damn, what's my man's name with the crazy conked hair? Well, Jimmy had it too, but there was, damn, I can't remember right now. I'll remember it later in the conversation. But he played with a lot of people, played on a lot of records. But he's important because for the artists and the label people, he kind of brought it back home. Does that make sense? He brought it back into the space that it came from.
Yeah, like and resettled it. Recentered that this comes from a particular experience.
Sure.
And not just oh, look at this cool way we want to play songs now.
Yeah. Plus that's like, that's that Jamie Foxx Prince shit. That's a sexy motherfucker. Like everybody wanted to be fucking like, he was a prototype. People forget like Jimmy was a prototype for Prince.
You know what I'm saying?
You know what I mean? And for a lot of dudes, like, you couldn't tell Jimi Hendrix nothing. Fuck were you gonna tell that man?
So one of my hold on, I dropped my little thing I had in my hand. So I was listening to, and I'll have links to, the two mixes that you shared, a couple of the ones you shared with us. But I was trying to track just my own visceral reaction and the sort of re-listening to some of them songs or the different songs in there. And so I'm in the house, and first of all, I started dancing. Because it was like, yo, this music is telling me to dance. So I'm like, and I was cooking too, which I usually dance when I'm making food, but that's a separate thing. It was like it was a confluence of two things that were making me happy at the same time, right? But then also I was thinking about the ways I'm listening to the songs, and the songs are fully speaking of Black things I understand. You know what I'm saying? They're speaking to like, I used to call it I remember my grandfather would put on certain records like family gatherings, and it would almost be like the kids need to go upstairs time.
Yeah. Oh, yes, it's a different time now.
Because the adults is about to kick it. Like it's been a great family function and all, but if we all gonna keep hanging out, y'all kids need to go upstairs. You know what I'm saying? 'Cause
they considered a lot of those lyrics as provocative at the time. Sorry. That's
Yeah.
That's when you know it starts smelling different. When the door's shut. You know what I'm saying? The different smell as a kid when you start being like, oh,
why does the living room smell funky?
Smell another way.
What's that smell?
All right. Yeah,
What's going on down there?
Time to wrap it up, B. Time to put the blankets on your head.
I mean, y'all keep the door closed up there. You know what I'm saying?
Y'all keep the door closed. Different music about to come on. We're gonna talk about them.
You be like, I gotta go to the bathroom. I just go to the bathroom.
It's grown folks time, which is, you know what, man. And I try, just almost to stay right with you, but that is something that is very interesting. That changed. That like. The distinction in the black family, the original families across the board, of like it's grown folks' time.
Yeah.
So something has changed, and children have a place, but not in this space.
Yeah.
And what does it start to mean when children think like their place is everywhere, and you start to inject that from the very beginning, right? You inject it like ain't no rules.
Well, it creates a space of self-entitlement. Because there's no checks and balances anymore. It's like, I grew up around a bunch of kids who called their parents by their first name.
First names, yeah.
Like, ooh, that doesn't even, my old earth is Russian. She had blonde hair and blue eyed, and she was not having that shit by a long shot. She was like, nope. That shit does not fly in this house. We have checks and balances.
There's adults and children.
Yeah.
And it's time for adults and time for children.
I remember I told my old earth to shut up once, and she was like, really? Man. She was like, go get your book bag and your toothbrush and whatever you need to survive out there. and she walked me downstairs to the door and handed me the bag that she just made me pack and said, okay, I need your keys. Good luck. Sure. That's a true story. There's no exaggeration about that.
No,
and it was akin to my grandmother on my dad's side doing the go get a switch.
Mm-hmm.
And you never got beat with the switch, but just by the time you came back with the switch, you were a mess.
like man, they gonna do to me.
Yeah, it was snot coming out of your nose and crying and I'm sorry. Same thing.
You got to get that one last. You're trying to get that one last explainer in. Like, look, I understand that I have violated something. Okay, right. I fully realize I'm out of line.
Right.
How can we resolve this in a most amicable fashion?
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
To the point, to your point, Majestic. Sorry, Jeff.
No, you good.
It creates a space where there's no accountability. There's no. It absolutely breeds just a funky self-entitled space. It's
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't believe in the I don't know. I feel like children should be taught to a space of give them enough rope and let them and explain the situations that they're dealing with, and why there's privilege in the situations they're privy to, and that for instance is I don't know. I just think not everybody needs a fucking gold star.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And no, you good. And I think that, the thing that was always salient to me was the idea that your parents, the adults around you, have a life that has nothing to do with you. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's this might be maybe I'll assign it to evangelicals or the conservative thought leaders. I don't know. There's this concept of being with your family that is sort of the preeminent idea. This is a family space. Have you ever been somewhere where somebody tried to tell you that, maybe your family was a little too raucous and they started off with the definition by going, this is a family place. And yeah, I know it is. I'm about to have this beer though. And I need you to go over there. I need you to go back over there. It's already 8:00. You know what I'm saying? It's going to be 9 soon. How long were you planning to be here with your children?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? There has to be, there's a line And I felt like coming up that you know, it was a time of the night where it was like, oh, hold up, you know what I mean? They about to put the Dolomite tapes on or this or that, or, you know what I'm saying? And then depending on who I was around, you know what I mean? It was at my grandfather's spot, like it would be music like this. You know what I'm saying? Where if it was my mom and them and her, you know, my aunt and uncle, like their age, it would be a little bit, you know, it would be more 70s, 60s to 70s to 80s.
Your hands up with the V.
Yeah, hands up with the V. But if it was Pop and his homies, you know what I'm saying? If we was out on or MLK and off Fountain Avenue on the crates, you know what I'm saying? They was playing this when they was hanging out. You know what I'm saying? They wasn't playing you know, they wasn't playing those 70s like new music, so to speak, or 80s new music. They wasn't listening to the Whispers. Like that's my pop listening to the Whispers. My grandfather and them was listening to, you know, stuff that I was like, I think I kind of like this, but I don't totally know what this dude's talking about. But I guess
we didn't have no context to it. But I think to the point was, again, I'm going back to this whole music business versus the cultural traditions of our community. And they're two different things.
Sure.
Right. And rock and roll is one of the rock and roll and now jazz are two, and the blues is, first of all, to me, the blues is the greatest example.
Yep.
Because like the fact that we grow up thinking that the blues was not our music, and at some point you start thinking that white interpretations of Black life is the actual thing that it was.
Right.
Right. Like the white interpretation of speaking about the Mississippi Delta.
Right.
To say nothing to the blues artists were the first hip hop artists. Because my man talking about champagne and reefer. Right. Like, what do I want? I want champagne and reefer. Right? A lot of early blues songs, you know, the Mud talking about I can never be satisfied. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Alyasha, to you, you know, real quick, just to bring it back to you, like, when one of your mixes, and when he's talking about, you know, when you're driving in that car, you got to evade the man with the star. Right?
Andre Williams.
What's his name?
Andre Williams.
And every time I listen to the mix, I stop right there and probably play it like 3 times. Because my man's like, listen, man, we're running corn liquor. We're running moonshine. And everything is all good until you run into that man with the star.
The star on the car.
The star on the car. You know what I mean? And so we got this blues stuff, and then we have this rock and roll, we have jazz. So we have these musical forms that the interest in how the music business digested it made it so that you didn't think it was your music.
Right.
And then depending if you had someone in your family to connect you to it, then you thought it was an old stage music done by Black people who were not hip. When, again, these jazz artists, the blues artists, the rock and roll artists were the hip people of the day.
Absolutely. So much of the language that has bled into like the contemporary space. Do you know, like, I remember hearing somebody like, oh, he shook. And I thought that was like some new shit. I thought that was some 80s shit.
Right.
30s shit. You hear dudes talk about that on blues records. Oh, I had him shook. He was shook.
You all shook up. That's right.
Now it's like, no, not even I'm all shook up. Just like I had him shook. Like I pulled out the 38 long and had him shook. Like shit like that. Like in a very pimp gangster space or confrontational space from the, you know, almost into like a golden era hip hop space or not even hip hop, but just a street space.
Right.
So it's fascinating how much of that language is still part of it, but has been part of the music, or maybe disappeared and then reappeared. I think. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, well, it got me thinking too, because it was something. I'm trying to remember what particular. I think it was on the Shim Sham Shimmy joint. He was talking about it was like the third in the first 20 minutes, and he's talking about I'm gonna mess it all up. The point I was trying to get to was that basically my man was talking about like a real situation where he's like, you know, I might have to hurt somebody up in here, but it's cool. Like I'm gonna be mellow about it, and I'm gonna go ahead and let her go. And the thought it had me thinking was like music as this space where especially Black people could like talk about aspects of their daily life in a way that you couldn't talk about it like nowhere else, I imagine.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So
Right.
you could talk about like, yo, part of my life is sometimes I got beefs with other people behind women or behind some shit I did, or they owe me some money. You know what I'm saying? And they ain't got my money. Like I need my money, man. Like you need to bring that.
There's a song called "Where's My Money." It's about this brother that's broke, and the landlord comes to him, and then he's got a tab at the butcher shop, and he's got a tab at the bar, and then the loan officer is chasing him, and it's just called "Where's My Money."
Yeah,
But that's the connectivity, right? That's what. So there's two ways we connect. We connect through like aspiration, which is not new to the space of music, like the bragging and boasting that you find in toasts. You know, I got a Lincoln Continental and a great big Cadillac, right?
Yeah.
Because that's been happening for ages. Like I'm the baddest man, you know, all the kind of Dolomite stuff, which comes from like toasts, and actually goes back to Africa. And then you've got storytelling, like, you know, this is how I'm feeling. I've got the blues because I came home, or whose shoes are under the bed? Those aren't my shoes. You know, what's that about?
That's cold.
Those kind of songs. Or there's a lot of songs about brothers like standing in front of the judge because they put their hands on somebody, or they had to go handle something. And I'm not saying advocating that space, but that's what a lot of the music's about. But Majestic, there's a thing that you talked about with the music industry, and there's two really great documentaries. There's one called Flip, Flop, and Fly, Rock and Roll Before Elvis. And it's by it's narrated and I guess directed by I forgot his name, this Jewish cat, who was an A&R in the 40s and 50s. And he talks about Big Joe Turner and Big Mama Thornton and Amos Milburn and one of my favorite artists, Wynonie Harris, who is actually from Omaha, Nebraska, of all places. And he talks about how the records, black rock and roll records, were called race records or sepia records. And the first sepia record, and here's another bugged out one, is that jukeboxes were even segregated. How bugged out is that shit? So you would have white jukeboxes in white places and black jukeboxes, and the black jukeboxes could have white records.
Right.
Black jukebox could have Frank Sinatra in it, but a white jukebox couldn't have Bo Diddley in it. And the wild shit is that there's I think it's by Bull Moose Jackson. Hold on, let me find out. The record called My Big 10-Inch is the record. Exactly.
Oh shit!
My Big 10-Inch is by Bull Moose Jackson, and it's about fucking. That is the record that broke the race record barrier, and people wanted the song so badly that they had to start putting it into white jukeboxes.
That makes sense.
But that doc it's on YouTube, and it used to be in its entirety, and it's a 4-part. Somebody downloaded it in 4 parts, and for whatever reason, the 4th part isn't up, or it wasn't the last time I checked because I tried to send it to somebody. And another one that's really interesting to talk about, that's also on there. I can't remember the name, but it's about Alan Freed, who was a radio disc jockey, and made a lot of really early rock and roll films. But he was an early rock and roll DJ. And here's a really interesting connection, because if you watch any of the movies, he's got Rock, 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 Rock Around the Clock, Rock Baby Rock. They're all like rock something. But the Alan Freed band, his backup band, and I used to have arguments with my mom's boyfriend about this shit, because he'd be like, no, we didn't, and I'd be like, you lying. You lie. Stop bullshitting. Because he'd be like, we didn't listen to rock and roll. And then I found out later he was like played in a bunch of bands that were, but the connection between jazz and rock and roll. So the Alan Freed band that's in all of these movies is fucking Lionel Hampton.
Oh shit!
Oh wow!
it's Lionel Hampton. He'll be like, take it away, Hamp, the Alan Freed band. Take it away, Hamp. And it's Lionel Hampton's band. That's the Alan Freed rock and roll band.
Oh, shit.
Wow.
And some of the greatest rock and roll / quote unquote rockabilly movies ever. But he used to have these shows that were some of the first integrated shows. And that's why when the payola shit went down in the 50s, he was the first dude to get taken down because his thing was like rock and roll is what's going to unite the kids.
Okay.
So he was one of the first people to have publicly integrated shows. And he had a TV show, and he got taken off the air because he had Frankie Lyman on. And it was at the so on Flatbush Avenue at Long Island College Hospital or Long Island College, right across from
right downtown, right?
Yeah, it used to be right by Fort Greene Park.
Yeah,
it used to be so diagonally across from Junior's used to be the Brooklyn Paramount Theater, and that's where they used to have it. And Frankie Lyman pulls his white girl up on the stage with him, and it was a wrap. They're like, we're shutting your whole shit down. And he was the first dude to go under the whole payola shit. But Alan Freed documentary is really fascinating. And if you get a chance to check out any of his movies, the Alan Freed rock and roll movies, the whole band is Lionel Hampton's band. Because kids, that was also synonymous. That sound of jazz was also at times considered rock and roll. Because kids didn't want to listen to what their parents were listening to. They talk about it in that flip, flop, and fly thing. Jazz was some edgy shit.
Yeah. Oh, right. That's a whole, that's a story in itself. How, again, to your point, some people would argue that the idea of jazz, and you could even say the word jazz, you know what I mean, comes from right, exactly. It comes from this, so we keep having this return back to like hot and cool jazz, right? Even the idea of like cool jazz is listening, the hot dance is musing it. You dancing, you're grinding, right? And so again, like this kind of context has been divorced from our culture. Right. And one thing when you brought up of someone like being from like Omaha, Nebraska, again, a lot of times we'd be like, oh man, somebody black in Omaha, Nebraska. There's somebody black everywhere. I was right, like it's somebody black everywhere. But again, when our music becomes very according to the music business, somebody like, okay, so where do we do music at? Ohio players. Where do we do? Everyone moves to LA, right? So in the 70s, you know what I mean? Like Philadelphia International, we start defining things by these places in these cities where this infrastructure is versus
Kansas City.
Kansas City blues, Kansas City jazz,
this
right?
Girl that I talked to just last night hit me. She's from Kansas, and she just hit me the Kansas City sound. I had no idea. I was like, what? Sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. It's the same thing. So I just think that, especially with rock and roll, again, because it becomes and for me personally, it becomes such a dominant music of an idea in my head that growing up, other than like my Uncle Jimmy being like, no, we're going to listen to this rock and roll, Jack. You know what I'm saying? And being like, okay, Uncle Jimmy, you're going to get some Thunderbird. We're going to listen to the rock and roll, right? So as a kid, that's how I connected. Like, Uncle Jimmy smokes weed and drinks Thunderbird.
Wild Irish Rose.
If he was listening, he would agree. And he'd probably say, motherfucker, I drunk other stuff besides that. But like, you know what I mean? Like, that's where I connected it. Yeah, and it's not until you get into a larger understanding of music, a larger understanding of black music, and a larger understanding of this like context, which is, like I said, which is why the mixtapes are so important, because it's like a portal, right? It's kind of like a gateway drug, right? To be able to like, oh man, hold on, let me listen. And when you start listening and you start separating and thinking that because this is upbeat person playing the guitar, that it's not your music.
It's absolutely ours. All of those techniques came from us. One of the most innovative cats in the space that nobody talks about, fucking Ike Turner. As much as, you know, not great.
It's like Turner, right? It's okay. We know it's like Turner.
One of the greatest motherfuckers. Yeah, you know.
Right. We all saw the movie. We know who Ike Turner was. We don't have to be apologists.
But I did a lot of shit. He paved the way for a lot of shit to happen, way more than people would like to give him credit for. Instrumentally, I'm not a musician, but I talk to a lot of musicians and dudes that like dig into the space, and they're like, "Yo, man, Ike Turner doesn't get enough credit," and because he's,
Ike Turner.
Ike Turner.
Ike Turner. One of the things I forgot to say about that Flip Flop and Fly documentary, and I didn't circle back to Justice, is that the narrator talks about how the Sam Phillips / Elvis combination worked and then moved the word out of the black space. He talks, the doc's about that. It's fascinating. It's definitely worth watching. I would suggest anybody listening, like, check it out or find it, because it's real dope. It's only 40 minutes long.
Oh, dope. The other thought I had, a couple thoughts. One, if I ever get in the marijuana business, I'm going to call my marijuana brand Reefer. That's one. Still my idea. Just send a brother a check. I ain't going to beef with you. Just send me a check. That's all I'm saying. Second thing, though, was the like listening to this, right, and you timed it, and this is my thing I try to do with history, right, is I try to move history out of like a rote documenting experiences and spots and people and whatnot, and thinking like, this is the music, right? I mean, and it's one of the, I think, highlights of the Malcolm X, the movie, is like Malcolm and him and his man's going with the zoot suits and the party and the da-da-da, right? But, one, as far as our culture is concerned, this is the music that most of our elders would have heard as kids. You know what I'm saying? Like, this would be what they folks was listening to. This is the, they peoples was playing. This is the music you could imagine. If you think about Elijah Muhammad, and somebody might get mad at me, but Elijah Muhammad, Farag, probably was somewhere somebody's playing some upbeat music while they was trying to figure out whatever the hell they was going to do with what they understood. You know what I'm saying? Like the time frame and the windows of different sounds, different styles, but also the way folks were trying to, make something go with what they had available to them. Right. I've had the discussion many times with people when people poo-poo, so to speak, our role in music, entertainment, and sports, and I always go, well, one of the things is about resilient people is if you only got so many lanes you can get busy in, you go ahead and get busy in them lanes. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can get busy in other lanes too. You know what I'm saying? And it may be, but it's not a magical quality of us that necessarily has led to this, but it's like, well, if this is the place where I can apply, my intelligence and my infinite potential, and get some sense of reciprocity and experience back, then I'll dive in. And some of us go to Olympian heights with it. And it's like, oh, snap, man. Like, man, how did he play his guitar like that? And damn, I'm listening to the way he does with the drums, or like, how's his cheeks get that big? Like, all those different aspects are also a representation of people like trying to make something out of what, they could jump into, what they could get into, and, not have somebody, at least not at that moment, trying to murder you. They may try to murder you later for other reasons, but just say in that context. And I think it's I just think it's a grounding thing to reconnect with these different parts, of the Black experience. And then you realize, like, oh snap, that's me too. That's me over there. Like, and then other people is digging it too. So that's the other side. I think that's the ill stuff about this whole, the amount of stuff that creatively is trying to talk about sex and sexuality, and somebody's trying to stop you from doing it. And it's like, look, man, Niles Devine shared a meme with me. I think it was Niles Devine. If it wasn't Niles Devine, I'm sorry, but I think he did. And it was like, everybody, grandma's talking about, look at these fast girls. Meanwhile, grandma had like 20 something kids. It's like, yo, everybody's smashing. Like, there's no smashing is not a new thing. Like, the kids today wasn't the first ones to realize they might have wanted to have relations at an age that we might have felt was inappropriate. Like, it's people like to do stuff. Humans, you leave them alone long enough, they start going, hey, me and you. You know what I'm saying? Like me and you. What's up with it? You know what I mean? And then, things happen. And that's not a bad thing. Like, this is a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
So that was one of my. I didn't even have a question. I just wanted to share that.
No, I dig it. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. Add on, please.
Yeah, I think in the rock and roll / blues / soul space, whatever we want to call it, right? We'll call it rock and roll. The thing, the beauty of it, exactly to your point, Justice, is it's not the same story told over and over, but the human experience expressed, and certain stories are similar. Everybody is, smashing, hopefully,
Yes, I answer yes.
Yes.
Hopefully they are. That's right. Or for our brothers, willfully they are.
Sure. It's the man said healthy, strong, and good breeders.
That's right.
And but frustration, grief, anger, joy, like the thing that I love about the early space, and the old recordings, like you can't fake, you can't auto-tune, they didn't know how to layer shit. It was usually a bunch of guys in a room, and if they didn't record it, there'd be multiple recordings of the same song, and it was maybe 4 tracks, maybe. You know what I mean? You can a lot of times you can hear like the bass, upright bass mic bleeding into the drum mic or vice. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
It's dusty, and so but in that there's so much feeling.
Yeah.
That gets washed out to a degree, and not completely. And I won't play the like, artists now can't, thing. But there is a different feeling.
Yeah.
Undeniably, at least for younger people might say something different because they've grown up in a different space. But I think like
they're used to everything being, again, I try not to return
social conditioning.
They did the social conditioning of the song has to be finished.
Right.
Right? Like the song has to be complete in a certain way. But the song has to be complete to you based on it being functional for radio.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because we all know songs, even into hip hop at a certain point where it was like, man, this song has 4 verses, man. And when are you going to get to play this? And you can only play it on the hip hop show at night because it's not structured to play during the day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so people grow and start feeling like, this has to be a certain way. And I'll even say in a hip hop context or an R&B context, you see people who almost like slip through and start doing something. So if you saw like the Wu-Tangs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when you'd be like, oh, that's not finished. Like you had the RZA songs, you knew that wasn't over. Like that wasn't totally mixed, but you didn't care.
But even in that space, that the rawness of that,
right? Or the same thing with like Dilla to a degree, right? Mm-hmm. Like there was some of that stuff you'd be like, okay, that drum is a certain way, but that sample is dirty, the drum is dirty, and guess what? And you feel it,
and you didn't clip it right. Like you didn't, you left a piece of a vocal at the end. Like you just, I shouldn't say you didn't clip it right. You, and it might have been intentional. It might have just been like, I just got to get it out, which is another thing. Having, worked in the space, like might have just been like, I just need to get it done. Like, and I don't care if there's a little ha at the end of this like drum loop, or a little woo or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it adds to the grit. And to the feel.
A person I want to bring up and get both of y'all perspective on this. No, I think because it's relevant to say how these things are still at play, right? And even I don't like most of it, I get it. Even some of the SoundCloud stuff, right? Because some of the SoundCloud stuff that the young people are doing, and I guess we're at the point where I can say that. Like
some of the young people and some brothers that
some of the old young people, right? Some of the not so young people and some of the young people. are doing this kind of music that is like, yo, I really did this right now, and I threw it up on SoundCloud just now. Right now, I don't think they're always trying to necessarily go in and make this kind of feeling music, but it is to say something about that process and to say something about what that means and how Black music continues to produce something like that. It was like, I'll give an example of all the verses, right? That Swiss and Timberland are doing. The emotive response of so many people to this whole Bounty Killer Beanie Man thing is very surprising. Because you got some people being like, oh man, RZA and Primo, when they hear all these beats. You got some people like, oh man, the sisters, Jill Scott and Erykah Badu, right? People like, oh, we about to hear real sound clash. I want to hear specialty songs that Beanie Man or Bounty Killer is doing especially for this event. And I'm like,
they're making dub plates or something for it?
I think they're making dub plates.
Okay. That's gangster.
Which is like which is like a part of, again, the rawness and the uniqueness of our music.
Yeah.
Like that comes out, right? But reggae gives you a space to do that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Right? Like that is something normalized within reggae culture. Whereas like, this is a song we made just for the day. We didn't make it for tomorrow.
Yeah.
Like it may not be
never
for
hear it
tomorrow.
again.
You might never hear the song again. We made it for the night.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like the very sense of the moment, right? The presence to Alyasha, to your point. Like we made this for the night. Or like, you know, if you ever, you know, when you dig into like Green Sleeves by Coltrane and they give you 18 versions of how he did Green Sleeves, right? Like there's 18 versions and they don't sound the same.
Yeah. And was one of my revelations even in jazz. Like, you know, earlier, God, when we checked in, I was reflecting on, you know, like where you know, my father was into jazz and he had some records that was left in my mom's. He gave some when when he passed to a friend of his who was also like, you know, his kind of buddy and collected jazz, but she kept some. And so when I got into really listening to jazz records, I started looking through stuff. And one, it was like, I've never heard of all these people. And then two, is mad different versions of some of these songs. So you'd be like, oh, I want to hear, like you were speaking to Green Sleeves. I have like 3 different versions of Naima. And they are not, you know what I'm saying? They're all, I actually got more than 3. They're all their own thing. You know what I'm saying?
I want to
all
put out
Naima
there,
at the same time.
I want to put out there the Eric Dolphy version of Naima has to be the most harrowing yet beautiful song.
I need to check it.
Like Eric Dolphy's version, because he was playing the flute and it's like, you know, stuff. It was sounds that you weren't used to hearing. Like you feel like it was bagpipes coming in, but like no, like, and that's it. Just I think your point of like this, and then when it went into that, like the versions and like someone came in and just did a song like, and the person I was thinking about was Sister Rosetta Tharpe, right? And I think also a huge part of what we missed, because I think sometimes we have blinders, like who created rock and roll? Little Richard. Who created rock and roll? Like, you know, Chuck Berry.
Right.
Like there were Black women kicking ass, right? Man. Like there were Black women kicking ass doing this music that, again, we're missing the whole part, because they were also bringing a whole different strength of voice, frankly. To those songs.
Yeah.
That we, you know, that again can you got one element of racism, then you got a whole element of sexism, that even if you said, okay, well, a Black person did do it, you're not going to say that a Black woman did Hound Dog. Right? Like, because if you have a conversation to say, well, a Black woman actually did Hound Dog before Elvis Presley.
Right. They'd be like,
then it's like,
Big Mama, who? I don't know.
Right.
No, Big Mama Thornton.
Right. Like, hold on. Big Mama Thornton. What? Like, there was a Black woman who did the song and he heard it because the producers heard it after they did it with her first. Like, so it opens up a lack of what I'm going to call the lack of collective knowledge of self. And I think this is part of what happens in America, where history being taught in a class goes, you came from Africa, then you were a slave. Then you got free and you suffered.
Right.
Then Martin Luther King. Right? like
No. Hold on. You got there's Christmas Addicts and Frederick Douglass are in there too.
That's what I'm saying. So Christmas Addicts was when you got here, he died. So the guy died.
But because Christmas Addicts is like, be a good boy. Because he took an L, he caught the first. He was the first one of y'all to rise up and catch a bullet for us.
You know what I'm saying,
right? And I don't want to. That's maybe shitty to frame him in that space, but yeah.
And then you got Frederick, and then again, just like a lot of people, we obscure what Frederick Douglass really said and represented, and how powerful he was in his time. Right? So it was almost like he was just a guy with the beard.
Oddly enough, I was thinking about one day. I was like, people that made us think Frederick Douglass was advocating nonviolence. He just was. I don't think he never ever like later. I was like, wait, Frederick Douglass at no point has said, "I'm not with whooping some ass around freedom."
No, but they love that, especially the Republican Party now, because he was, a bona fide Republican, which was a very different Republican Party. And that's a whole other.
That's a whole other joint.
But he was. And so then he was like, "Yo, kill these motherfuckers."
Fuck. Nice. So you got that, and then they just jumped, right? And then it's like, okay, y'all came out. There was some people who got elected, senators and congressmen. Martin Luther King was born. Okay, y'all ready? Like, let's go. And then within that, though, you lose the Niagara movement. Within that, you lose the development of jazz, the development of blues. You lose so much by skipping over 70 years, right? And when you do that, you miss the forms of music we're talking about. Yeah. Because if you jump over and then you just jump into the 60s and somebody was fighting for freedom and Rosa Parks sat down so you could stand up so someone else could fly, or whatever the term they used to have old then there's also 80 years of artistic production.
Man.
Right?
That you're minimalizing. You're minimalizing even the idea when people say dance to jig, and they forget understanding that like the jig was when black folks was up in 5 Points in New York dancing.
Right.
And the Irish came and saw what they was doing, and there was some, kind of interaction and human capital flowing back and forth, and then you get a dance, right? So you miss it. No, yeah, but I'm just saying, like, you miss, and by missing that time period, when we jump in history and go from Plessy and Ferguson to like Martin Luther King, it obscures the development of the blues, of jazz, and of early rock and roll, and not centering black folks in that time.
Absolutely.
It's something like, even as an image, and this may be a full Rajee speculation. However, I was in a conversation and Booker T and WB Du Bois came up, and I thought in my mind, if after some, them having some sort of debate or whatever, if they met up somewhere later in the evening and had an exchange of adult beverages, more than likely the music that was playing was something that was up tempo. And, would be music that they would not have listened to around white folks, so to speak. Especially in their age, right? And we can make this world where they're like, no, he was austere, serious race man. Like, yeah, but he probably had some cone liquor and was like, look, man, I disagree with you on this, but, we black and shit.
Probably was having a po' boy up in some fucking juke joint somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's the other table in the corner and...
Exactly. That's the other piece I think about our culture, which is like, again, this whole southern element of like the juke joint, that there were places owned by black folks in kind of the middle of nowhere where black artists got the ability to come and share music with each other and get paid from each other. Right. And the lens of how music traveled. Just like similar, at one point you'd be like, all right, you had to read the source, right? Or at some point you had to go to one of the music conferences. So now you got to get on blogs or something crazy. At some point it was like the juke joint. It was like, did you go to the juke joint in Memphis? Then you heard the guy in Memphis. And if you didn't go to the juke joint in Memphis, you might not have heard the guy in Memphis.
Sure.
So everyone eventually had to go to Memphis as an element of black culture,
right,
to be able to go and hear what is happening. They have to make a pilgrimage, right? Like Graceland, as crazy as it is, it's like, okay, this idea, people are like, you gotta go to Graceland. But what you're really broadly saying is you gotta go to Memphis. And when you go to Memphis, you get the blues, you get rock and roll, you get a whole nother centering.
You made me think of about a couple things. Like one, when we talked about juke joints, and then I started thinking about the Chitlin circuit. This is my thinking, and it frustrates me because I am who I am, and I have my own 5% of hang-ups, right? I'm like, fuck, why the fuck do it got to be called the Chitlin circuit? But it is what it is, right?
I did want a shirt that I didn't get. I got to tell you, I didn't get it. I wanted that shirt from your man, from Rasa Riddle. I wanted that shirt.
That's a good one right there, by the way.
But I did not get that shirt because it said the Chitlin circuit. You're right.
And it's a funny one, right? Like pigs are really smart animals. I'm not eating them. Same thing like in the movie. He's like, might be the smartest motherfucker, but I'm not eating them, right? And that's frustrating, which brings me to the point of where we are in how we live. Like, and it's just my own weird stream of consciousness, right? Like, so in who we are in this space, it's funny how Malcolm and a bunch of people, like I talked to this sister and she was like, oh, like that music is just people cooning and da-da-da-da-da. And I was like, the fuck?
Yeah, right.
I was like, yo, that's that bullshit. She's like, it reminds me of Malcolm X when he was like making fun of everybody and blah, 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 blah. And then I was like, you know what? Like the thing that people forget is that I came here to be righteous, not holy. My job is to be a righteous man, not a holy man. I will never experience most of life. Well, it's hard to, if I'm trying to be holy. I am sadly mixed, diluted, or tampered with. Not sadly, it just is. You know what I mean? Because that's how you fucking experience life. You put yourself in adverse situations and you make mistakes. I'm not here to be holy. I have no wish to be holy. We came out of fucking shooting galleries and fucking backroom bars and fucking crap shoots. You know what I mean? And juke joints.
Yeah.
That's right. So if you can teach in that space instead of this very sterile, holier than thou space, and whatever, people will take it however the fuck they need to take it. That's strength to me, and growth. And not saying that there's beauty in the discipline of, aspiring to be a holy man. Absolutely. That's incredible. But for the rest of us, not even I'm not wearing a t-shirt either. Right. I'm just saying, like, there's a thing there that this girl I talked to, she wrote me this thing the other day. She wrote 100 things that make me feel alive. It was very profound. But being in those sort of sketchy, adverse situations where I know something might happen, and I'm not like an adrenaline junkie by any means, but being in those spaces reminds me that I'm alive. And being in like a juke joint situation or some dusty like hip hop club or a record store, you understand what I'm saying? Like,
yes, sir.
That reminds me. Just will tell you that I'm alive, and
just will tell you I thrive in those environments. Even sometimes when they like come up out of these environments, right? But I do think there are also places of, to use a somewhat highfalutin term, there are places of cultural production.
Absolutely.
Right, there are places.
Look at what they produced.
Look at what they produced. Whether it's a juke joint, jazz club, dance hall, hip hop show, right? Whether you say it was a rooftop or was a tunnel, right? Like all these places we talk about,
sideshows,
right? Sideshows on the West Coast, right?
The Hilltop. Where did the Hilltop Hustlers play? Because I remember.
After midnight.
Yeah.
Yeah, after midnight was out of, like, it was one of them places. It was actually mythology. I was thinking about that recently, how in certain culture, depending on your age and framework, someplace there was an actual mythology of what happened there, right? And then you get older and you be like, oh, okay, well, it wasn't mythology. It was a real place. It's kind of like how people frame the tunnel, right? Like how they'll tell stories about the tunnel was like,
oh man,
it was like some underground, like, versus like it was a club that was looking to make money done by real people who had unisex bathrooms for a variety of reasons. Sure. You know what I mean? But
because it was cheap.
But it was cheap, exactly. But they still were places of cultural production. Yeah. And I think one of the challenges is going to be, especially frankly, post-COVID and post people's fears of how do you continue to look at these spaces of cultural production and interchange, right? Like, and so that ranges everywhere from the jazz clubs, from the fields, frankly, to the jazz clubs in New Orleans, to the places in Memphis, to the places in Chicago, to the rock and roll juke joints and rockabilly spots. But I also think rockabilly totally is separate from black folks. Because I think people just say rock, when they say rockabilly, it totally goes into cars and other culture and is divorced from stuff.
Yes and no, because I DJ my biggest crowd. The irony to I was talking to Just about this morning.
Yeah.
Was it?
Yeah, earlier.
So I DJ mostly for rockabilly. The scene on a whole is called the rockabilly scene. But what's fascinating about it, especially like in Southern California, is predominantly Chicano and Mexican.
Right.
So the brownness of it, like their parents, like if you look at any lowrider oldies compilation, it's all soul.
It's all soul music, yeah. Right. It's all like, even people at war, the music they listen to is actually the same.
Sure. And so, and the war really didn't start till the 80s.
No.
A lot of people don't bring that up because it was, the Young Lords and the Panthers and everybody was working the Brown Berets and Yellow Peril. Everybody was on, was like, we know what the fuck is up. And then you have the White Panther Party in Detroit, which a lot of people don't even take it because they understood the economics of racism. Other conversation. But in the rockabilly scene, if you go and you start playing, they have what are called boppers and jivers, and then I play stompers and screamers. But boppers and jivers are largely R&B songs, and a lot of the jivers are actually like kind of doo-wop songs. And jiving is a kind of a dance, and a bop looks like almost like doing the Charlie Brown, or more like the way Linus dances. But that's a thing. And so you have all these like quote unquote rockabilly nights where the DJs play mostly R&B and black rock and roll, if you will. So, but it's also depends on where you are, because there definitely is like the dude with the flaming shirt and the crazy high pompadour that isn't trying to hear any of that. Like, you know what I mean? They're just on their own board. Yeah. But at least in the Southern California scene and in New York, you'll find a lot like my brother Tito, Harlem Slim, who I feel like I sent your brothers. He played some gospel stuff on the weekend. One of the sharpest cats ever. That's like my brother. Like he checks up on the old earth and everything.
I would like to check him out. Yeah,
Harlem Slim, and he's a blues musician, and he does traditional blues and what he calls contemporary blues. So he'll write blues songs that sound old school but in contemporary vernacular, which is also brilliant to me. But he also plays a lot of like quote unquote rockabilly shows. So that's like a whole other thing. And Justice and I also had a conversation. The Elvis thing is fascinating to me, and I don't really, or maybe I was talking to Nas Divine about Elvis. But Elvis is interesting. Elvis couldn't be. People do the like Elvis vilifying or demonizing or whatever. And I wasn't there, but I do know that if you look at the context of the space and the time and the area of of when all that shit happened. Because a lot of like systemic racism, obviously, is economics too. But people weren't. You talked about like Irish folks and black folks, and that's a whole other conversation too. But Elvis couldn't learn all that shit unless he was around black folks, like around,
right, like kicking it with them,
And it wasn't this. You didn't have social media where you could kind of fake the funk. You understand what I'm saying? Like you couldn't be in the midst of folks. A lot of it is because you were broke. You lived in the same fucking neighborhood.
That's right.
You couldn't go, I'm going to fucking DM you and go and hang out in your hood and pretend I'm fucking black. You know what I'm saying? Like, or all that other bullshit. Like those passes didn't exist.
Yeah.
That social currency didn't exist. So one could say like, yeah, he took that, but one also has to acknowledge that that's part of how he came up.
It was a culture of the space. I mean, I think we have to get past that.
And people, I get frustrated with part of the narrative because what it does is it takes away from our power.
It's revisionist history too.
Do you understand?
Right? Like
it's revisionist, but also from the space of black folks. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like, the South. Yo, man, do you understand where I'm coming from?
It paints it. No, from the South across the board, it paints.
And I'm not like trying to paint him as some fucking saint or whatever the fuck else. You know what I'm saying? But I'm just like, yo, like y'all need to stop.
Well, the thing is, we forget that the South was different in its own way.
Absolutely.
Right? Like the institutions, the structure of the South was different. So, and I think a lot of that happens from people who were raised in the North or were raised in the West that have a new version of how the South functioned.
Sure.
Right? And if you have a new version of how the South functioned, what your thing was everyone was so segregated versus there were a lot of personal interactions, business interactions, and all these things, then you'll forget that whether you're talking about New Orleans jazz, whether you're talking about rock and roll, whether you're talking about the blues, that there were actual natural interactions that were not weird, that it wasn't framed to use a Damon Dash thing. Every white person that engaged with the music was not a culture vulture.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And to that same point, if Elvis, here's another crazy one. And this is a lot of people don't put it in this, don't frame it like this. If Elvis had never made Hound Dog, right? And then nobody did the research, who might have even heard of Big Mama Thornton?
Yeah. Again, because if you don't share
might
culture,
not have even gotten any more royalties or record money or asked to make more records later.
And absolutely.
And that's not like a defending or apologist race statement. That's like fucking economics.
It's a pragmatic reality of the situation as it existed.
Yeah. I wish I was half as articulate as you are.
I mean, I'm gonna go on a justice tangent that no one, you maybe could have seen it coming. It's one of my functional theories around, like the antagonism, especially in the South, is that you have a day-to-day experience where you are spending copious amounts of time with these people who you say you're better than. Yeah. You're around them all the time. You see how ill they are. You see how like creative they are. You see how they're not this other thing. But at the same time, you got to like adhere to like the rest of the structure, right? So we've brought up dissonance several times in our conversations. So the only way you could like, you got to act a whole fool to deny, like to get around the thing. Like I'm with these people all the time. These people are cooking good food. They're having parties and shit. I like their fucking parties, but also like I know I'm not supposed to like them, and I'm over here, and then I meet these other white people from other places who like are playing off of my script, but they don't live around these people, so they don't actually know the truth about them. So therefore, I got to act a whole fool. You know what I mean? To maintain my sense of self and my position of power, not just in real time, but actually in my brain. So you get all kinds of weird manifestations. And, I would go further to say some of the crazy permutations of the way our society functions is rooted in trying to act like something that is true is not true. and constantly having to double down and find new ways to wrap around to make it not true. So you'd be like,
down on your bullshit.
You'd be like, oh no, actually, because what it was, to the from the Drake to Mania, you know what I'm saying, to, like I got notes where I'm working on this, but there's I'm just gonna see it this way. I think I have the notes and the pieces to tie that most of all our wacky conspiracy stuff and people who in the Illuminati, all of that is rooted in disenfranchised white dudes going back to the 1800s, trying to justify why other people should focus on them and not what really happened.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? And then, so then this theme plays out, creatively, where, and I think it was good that we spoke to the power of sort of the economic machine that makes things happen. Because I think from, you have an era where the primary way to hear new music is to be at it live. Like, it was not easy for most of the last 100 years to like just hear music in your house, right? So you hear it on the radio, that made it easier, but then it was still easier. Like the tools now is like, I can listen to anything I want for 48 hours if I have the internet. You know what I'm saying? And a little ingenuity, even if I don't have any money. I could probably listen to a lot of different music. 50 years ago, you was dependent, you know what I'm saying, on the radio. Yep. You know what I'm saying? I'll never forget, Majestic, and I want to circle back something Majestic said about he's a fine connoisseur of the Black experience. I don't want the listeners to let that go. That we, I remember I had said to us, he's like, look, guy, when we started getting this, man, we didn't even listen to hip hop on the radio. Like, hip hop was something you went and visited. You know what I mean? And I always think about like Melly Mel and his, off and on again, sometimes negative thoughts about Rakim, is that Melly Mel, even though he had records, you probably had to see the illest Melly Mel, like seeing Melly Mel, right? Or getting the tapes in the streets and shit like that, right? Where by the time, I'm old enough to go get a record and I get Rakim, I can go get Rakim's stuff at the store. It's all the songs. It's packaged in a way that I'm in the house. I got a playlist I play, and I just be singing Lyrics Fury and Paid Full and all the hits, and I get all hype and I get excited. I put my clothes on and go to work. I feel great about myself. But I realize also my ability to do that reflects a change in the way that could get to me. You know what I'm saying? Which when, Melly Mel and others of his time, they never got that chance to give me their music that way.
So let me assert this, and I'm sure Alyasha can add on, because I will say for folks who are listening, you might think you know who you're talking to, but you have no idea when you're talking now. When you're hearing our brother, you have no idea. Even he doesn't speak for him. His things that he's done speak for himself, but he does not speak about himself. But you have no idea.
Yes, sir.
But there's an important part of like everything. I'm going to argue from like Grandmaster Caz to probably Curtis Blow and Run DMC were the people who first could do this. Everything else, again, was mythos. So when you think about Jimmy Spicer, my uncle, I got an uncle that's 10 years older than me. He swears by Jimmy Spicer. Like, you can't tell him anybody did anything iller to Jimmy Spicer, between Jimmy Spicer and Rakim. To him,
Dollar Bill is a record. You put Dollar Bill on right now.
Dollar Super Rhyme.
If somebody doesn't dance, they're an asshole.
Like if you so when you like straight up between that music again, it's like you had to experience it, and once it became kind of conditioned and refined, right, to be able to be digestible again for the model, because Dollar Bill, Super Rhymes, the best of Busy B, right? I'm gonna argue the best of Kool Moe D was not experienced in digestible ways.
No,
by the record industry.
To your point, to that same point, like I'm old enough to remember. Pull my old head card right now. Staying up and listening to like P. Fine and even the world famous Supreme Team show. I'm about to be 50 in August, and you could hear there'd be select radio shows that you heard about word of mouth through somebody's older brother normally that was going to college, because a lot of them were on college radio
shows. That's right.
And you would stay up like Friday night with your tape, some Phil Collins tape that you stuffed tissue paper in the thing.
So you tape over it.
Or whatever, some shit that you didn't want anymore. And staying up and recording it so you could listen to it for the rest of the week.
And so when you hear,
2, and then there were 3, and then there were 4 maybe, but there wasn't. And I remember when BLS integrated rap, not hip hop, rap, because that's what they were calling it at the time. Hip hop wasn't even really the term at the time. Into their daily, meaning like, morning to or 24-hour rotation, started introducing like rap music. And then you also had like the Mr. Magic show on WBLS, and you had Mr. Magic's Rap Attack was BLS, and then you had Red Alert on
Kiss,
on Kiss, and even like trading tapes. And I forgot the radio station in Philly, but that was like a big thing. But like,
so it was actually it was WHAT first,
okay,
and then it was WDAS, Power 99, which was our big. What became the hip hop station came later. It was WHAT that Lady B was on first, and then she went to DAS.
But imagine. Oh, sorry. For the people listening, imagine a period in time where you could actually, without exaggeration, name almost every rap record that was out, like, or artist that had put a record out. I mean, that's like, that's the thing. Like, this is how many people are doing this right now.
Yeah.
And I don't think contextually people understand that that's a many people's reality.
So I'm going to suggest, I'm going to argue an interesting space with this. One of the most interesting I'm going to call, because now 26 years later, I can say this. One of the last times where you can have a live recording that had this huge effect on everybody was actually the Biggie, Tupac, Shaheem, Big Daddy Kane, 1994 recording. Because if you think about everything,
Mac 11s,
they got 838s, 99s, 10 Texans, shit never ends. Right? We all know it, right?
I got the numbers wrong, but what I'm saying.
So, but that's the last one. That's the last one where actually recording what someone did in a concert or a radio actually translated to a larger, broader audience, right? And so everything after that became about, like, you had the freestyles that Clue would do to capturing that energy, but that was the last one where you just heard, you didn't know what was going to happen. You couldn't stop it, right? They just recorded it and did it. So to your point about Melly Mel and Rakim, again, the culture of it having a live component and it being based in a live component made it very special, but also going into the changing demographics and changing habitation kind of qualities of the Black community broadly shifts some of that as well. Because then you just sometimes don't have the numbers you used to have, or again, like, people be like, okay, well, you know what? I'm trying to be big because I'm doing the music because I love it. But then at some point, like, I'm trying to be rich, right?
Right.
And so me trying to be rich means you won't see me often because I'm trying to be rich. And I just think that's an important, this just juxtaposition of this tension between the art that is performed for a certain reason and then eventually how the art is commodified but not controlled. And then not packaged appropriately to the parties that created it and had a role in it, it's still something we're challenged to this day. I think Jay-Z in his own way is making strides towards it, whether he's expressly doing it for people or not. But I think that's always a tension. I think the rock and roll one to me is the most obvious and broad and the most striking, because jazz my family was into, so I got that. By the time I got with my, hang out with my grandfather, he didn't want to listen to nothing. He wanted to watch TV. and my grandmother was putting on gospel when she wasn't listening to a lecture. So for me, the rock and roll and that kind of up tempo, the music, was really like that piece that was missing. And again, I use it in the context of our history, because if you just skip over 1949 and act like black people didn't do nothing important in 49 or 55, and nothing was important until Brown versus the Board of Education, right?
Right.
All right, then of course you've lost what music people were doing. You don't even know nothing occurred in that time. So that was my unsolicited.
That's peace.
Ran about that shit.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, guys.
Sorry.
You got it.
I was just, I was just thinking about the rock and roll space and the conversation we had earlier, which I'm curious about some shit, but earlier today, Justice and I were talking about, oh man, my Oldhead is trying to FaceTime me. Hang on one sec.
All right, wait.
Hey, Mom. Mom, I'm on a podcast.
It's real music. This is real time. This is real life, man.
I gotta call you back.
This is real life here, Jack.
Hold on.
Absolutely, man. No, just thank you. I mean, I know, just because of the timing, we got to transition.
Yeah.
But I think you bringing this up and setting this up was just a really important thing, because it gives you a context to look back and a context to be rigorous about how we have framed things in the past.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we hear you. It's a context to be rigorous about how we frame stuff in the past and how not to make the same mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? Because the same mistakes we make with music, I argue we make with culture.
Yeah.
The same mistakes we make with fashion, right? Like, there are people who don't think any black person designed anything until Carl Kanai. Right? So, like, when you tell people about, like, Willie wear and all the stuff like that.
I love you. Bye.
Like, people are like, wait, there were black fashion designers. That's all good. There were black fashion designers in the 80s. I was just saying,
Willie wear.
That's what I'm saying. Willie wear.
Get ripped out of this shit, man. People make.
But that's my point. Like, it doesn't just happen with music. It happens with broader culture, right? Broader culture obscures these things that didn't happen but so long ago.
Sure, that's not that long ago, and people write him out. He has a star on the Star of Fashion, man.
Yeah, no, it's like growing up, like Willie wear. My mother would tell me about Willie wear, right? And so, and it actually connects just to our last thing, because I think, and in some ways, Andre Harrell was the first person to make sure he was written in, in a sense of he consolidated and had a very clear vision of what he was trying to sell. And he advanced that thing.
Sure.
And he engaged with a lot of people who remember and who are like, they have the memory to know that he advanced an idea. Mm. And so I think that, again, becomes important, because as we look at like a Little Richard, and we're looking at like somebody that by the time that most younger people, 45 and under, became aware of him, was a caricature.
Yeah,
of what he did, right? Because you just seen him whenever he was yelling at people on TV.
Little Richard.
Yeah. Like on television shows, he was yelling at people, and people would laugh. And they would clap when he'd come on. He would yell at people and be flamboyant, right? Versus like no, this is a pioneer. But I think Andre Harrell was actually one of the first people to be like, you know what? I'm transmitting Black culture very explicitly, right? I'm transmitting aspirational Black culture very explicitly, and I want you to know it. So all the people who still are doing it 25 to 30 years later, 35 years later in some senses, from when they were doing it, there is now a definition of what was being shared. Like taking the culture of Uptown and the Bronx and very explicitly saying this is Black culture, right? Like that I'm taking and saying we're projecting to the world so that it can't be repackaged like we didn't do it.
Sure.
Right. And I think that is something that, you know, just tying those two together just is really, really important.
That's absolutely important. There's a brother named Dom Shamir that was a friend and mentor that was signed to Uptown. He was in a group called Key West, which was Kyle West, who's Albie Shore's
the producers. Yeah. He was Kyle West break it down. And
Dom was the lead singer of Key West. And we were like inseparable at the time. And it was right around when I started to get knowledge. So it was a really vivid period in time for me. And Dom would come back because he was signed to Uptown. But like the stories, and then like being able to like be around Andre a little bit and watching like Puff be like the intern dude, which is crazy to say. Like Andre, absolutely to your point, was like, we're going to raise the bar. That was obvious. And done with absolute intention. And a lot of people don't get that. Like I remember like listening to like Jodeci demo tapes over there and Mary J demo tapes. And Puff had just kind of like not split, but was venturing off. He was doing parties with Jessica and was like messing with record stuff. And like him telling Dom like, yo. So Dom used to be called Exotic Dom because he was like the dude that would be like wearing like Gautier stuff. And we're like, what the fuck is that?
When the fashion houses were not quite in style in the same way they are now.
You real extra. Like I got this polo shit, but you're real extra. You got like a crazy like you want some fucking
like, yo, what is that?
You know, Gautier. All right. Or you know, and any number of things, like, you know, just a lot of like he was Exotic Dom for a reason. And I remember the Versace shades watching you. Like Dom is the reason that Biggie wore Versace sunglasses to cover his fucking lazy eye, because Dom was like, just tell that motherfucker to wear some fucking Versace shades.
Because they were big enough.
Right.
Yeah, they were big. They
were big enough to cover. They were wide enough to cover his eye. Right.
But Andre was fascinating because it wasn't so much, obviously he'd done like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde thing, but more creating an aspirational space that wasn't, what's the word I'm looking for? He wasn't trying to like take. He was trying to create an aspirational space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel you.
As opposed to like create aspirational goods for people to just like latch onto and consume. Trying to create a whole like a mindset, if you will.
Yeah.
With a label.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And this is before social media, and it resonated. You looked at the artists, you looked at how they presented themselves, and they were so different. You know, the way they were styled, and that was all very intentional. And I commend him for that, because it really raised the bar for a lot. You know, I think a lot of people just would have been doing the same shit had it not been for him.
Thank you.
That's my little.
No, that's peace. I think that brings these two threads together perfectly. You know, the thing we always, or at least we us always want to try to find is that there's these truths about how we move through the world that are rooted in our intentions and our understanding. And they're not all just, ours, but other people have the package under which someone who's trying to do something great for Black people doesn't always show up the same. And I think speaking to, what you brought up earlier in terms of context, when we blank out, almost that 70, 80-year span from the end of the Civil War to 1954, we make this world where everything everyone was trying to do or doing in that window outside. I guess you get the Harlem Renaissance, right? You get the Harlem Renaissance in there, right? So you get that, and then nobody reads the poems, but that's another story.
Or listens to what the hell they said.
Right, don't read the poems or listen to what they said. They just talk shit about it.
Were you listening to what Langston was saying?
You know what I'm saying? Did you read any of that? Did you look at the book? Did you look at
or the impact that it had on France?
Or they only know a dream deferred. Right. Only. That's it. Sorry.
It's all good because I could go all night on this.
Oh, man, listen.
Like, then you get you zoom all the way up to a dude to his era, and you get to Little Richard, where at some point Little Richard must have said, well, you know what I could do to keep me relevant? I could go on stage, I can go on shows and be this person that people have seen me be. Since I went on the Grammys or whatever it is in 84, 86, it was like, y'all don't give me my props and shit, man. It's basically like, y'all need to give me my motherfucking props. I'm out here. And so he at some point said, you know what? Fuck it. I done lived my whole life performing. I can keep myself relevant by occasionally popping up on your TV show or in your movie and cussing out the cops or some other shit about how they treat me different because I'm Black. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then you get to Andre Harrell and him being intentional about, like, no, we have these other things about us that we want out of life, and it ain't just, and it's not rooted necessarily in I don't know, like in a craven criminality, so to speak. You know what I'm saying? Right. It's like, yo, man, we want, we want to dance, we want to have a good time, we want to look nice, we want to be in a place with fly view. You know what I'm saying? People dancing, having a great time, feeling good about what they do with their life, and it's all right. It's like that. Like we can have that too. You know what I'm saying? I think that's a
but also not being like quote unquote hood rich. We can make like sound investments and be proud of our culture and be actual, entrepreneurs.
And reflect who we actually are. And I think I will tie this up for me as saying actually connecting it for us as and within our value system and culture to this idea of what Harlem as what we know as the Mecca, and then generally what people know as the Mecca for a broader sense of culture, actually was about. Because make no mistake, Uptown was being very clear. This is what happened when you crossed 98th Street or 96th Street, right? Like there was something else occurring, whether it was El Barrio, whether it's 125th Street, whether it's 145th Street, whether it's the Rucker, right? Whether it's parts of the Bronx. This is a thing that's happening. And then the crux of understanding of just this lifestyle, you know what I mean, of the best of all of it. Like many of us all know when we're with our brothers and our sisters, we want the best for each other. We're not going to eat the food that's not good. We're going to eat the best food, right? We're not going to when they was wearing culture felts, right? And different things and wearing certain hats. We want the best of these things. Andre Harrell took that broader idea and then still being a race man, so to speak, and saying, this is the best of what Black people bring to the table. So I just think like that's really important, because if not, if we forget the lessons that what it meant and how Harlem and as a broader ethic Uptown represented, then we'll forget that this was presenting the best of original people, right? This was presenting the best of our culture. And not in the sense that we're ashamed of anything, not respectability politics, but this is how we live, and even in spaces where we're trying to be destroyed, that we still flourish.
Word up.
That's funny. It just reminded me of something.
Go ahead and share that, guy.
Basically, like all land is useful.
Actual fact.
You know, there's no such thing as land that's not. All land is useful for something. You just got to figure out what it's useful for. So it's not such thing as useless land. Who better to figure that out than the original man?
Indeed.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, we had like an hour and a half, and you know, I always like to save something for later. You know what I'm saying? I work out from the I want to deal with the physical fitness. You know what I'm saying? The concept of leave a set in the can. You know what I'm saying? So you can get it later. You know what I'm saying? Some people like, you got to work to your muscles. Yeah, you know what science says? Leave a little behind, man. Leave one in there. You come back and get it later. Nice. I want to tie us off because, you know, I'd like to have us have some future conversations around a couple topics. Also, as I Majestic spoke to, Alyasha, some of the other aspects of your own reality that I think you could probably add, you know what I mean, some significant ciphers, you know, in our understanding and development of our understanding around the other things that you do that are not related to mixing music. But we'll say that, you know, I'm sure we could have a robust fashion conversation, among other things, obviously.
No, I'm down. I love building with y'all brothers.
Indeed. So I want to, well, you know, I just say, you know, just a shot at word each of y'all want to add to close out, and then we'll just tie it off right there. So I'll go to you, Alyasha, then Majestic, then I'll close. So,
yeah, I just appreciate you having me and engaging in dialogue. I've learned a lot this evening as well. I appreciate being able to share. And thank you.
Peace.
Like, well, again, you know, when we talk about the good brothers, like, you know, just we're doing this, but really, you know, there's a whole big extended family of good brothers and good sisters, right? And the guy coming on, just an example of that. So it's just important to say thank you for providing this platform, but then also looking at the tie-ins of when can someone commodify you, and when do you decide how to present yourself? It's the biggest thing I've taken from the last couple of weeks, right? Like, you know, even the food conversation we've had. When do you know, can someone sell your food back to you versus when do you, you know, decide how to present yourself to people in order for them to get a understanding, not the supreme understanding, but a understanding. Peace.
That's peace.
Yeah. So with that, I'm gonna say thank you both for adding on, sharing tonight, and to you, those that are listening, you know, always take the best part for yourself. And we're just gonna close it with, you know, the age old saying. I mean, I might come up with some kind of complicated Negro spiritual mythology about it. Oh, you got something?
I forgot something.
Oh, say it.
We had talked last week. We talked about the Enlightener.
Oh yeah, that's right. Don't let that go.
Sorry, I had to drop this for our people that are listening. And so we know, you know, the Enlightener, I believe, is written by Knowledge Law and Amar Education.
Amar Education, yeah, actual fact.
The melody and part of the chorus comes from the Marvelettes. I'll keep holding on. So the melody of the Enlightener is sung to I'll Keep Holding On by the Marvelettes. And even in the song, one of the lyrics is each and every day and each and every way.
That's right.
Just an actual fun fact. And that's, there is a pun. And I didn't mean it to be punny. But it's a great song. Give it a listen.
Will do.
Yeah. Going to it right now.
Indeed. Yeah. So with that, I'm going to say peace.
Peace.
Peace.